I grew up way out in the country in Indiana, where hymns of geese sometimes did fly overhead, often did, depending on the time of year. Out where it gets really, really dark at night, where you give some thought before you take a trip to the store. We didn't see homeless people out there. The first time I remember encountering a person living on the streets was as a 13-year-old. Some of us had gone to Indianapolis for a Southern Gospel concert. We were walking back to the car in the freezing cold. It was snowing a little bit, and I spotted a man sleeping on a sewer grate. He was hunkered under some blankets. His belongings were in bags around him. And the air from below was keeping him warmer than he would have been otherwise, but still I knew he must have been freezing. I was struck with the notion that I needed to do something right then to help this man, the way a 13-year-old sometimes is, convinced that I could do something in this moment to help this man. So I talked to my older friend into hightailing it back to the venue. We rushed into the hall, and breathlessly I told a member of one of the quartets who sang that night that there was a man sleeping in the streets, and I thought someone should do something to help this guy, WWJD, etc., etc. This singer was one of my heroes. I'm a church nerd from way back. I'd been waiting for months to get his autograph. But when I asked him to help this homeless guy, he said something along the lines of, yeah, there are lots of homeless people out there, but have faith that God will take care of them and someday they'll go to heaven. Now, I wasn't one of those kids who was always questioning God. I was a true believer. But that night, something about that man's answer and what I understood of life of faith to be about created a hairline fracture in my religious foundation. I think I was beginning to see that a faith that is too focused on the next world is often no good in this one. That's one of the notions that's at the heart of humanism. Humanism's origins seem to go back formally to about the time of the founding of the United States. In 1765, the author of an anonymous article in a French periodical spoke of, quote, the general love of humanity, a virtue hitherto quite nameless among us, and which we will venture to call humanism. For the time has come to create a word for such a beautiful and necessary thing. So from the very beginning, the beating heart of humanism has been compassion, a love for humanity, a need to improve our plight, our collective plight, and belief in the potential of people. The assertion that compassion doesn't need to be worked up through supernaturalism, it doesn't come to us from on high. Compassion is inherent in us and required of us. Several Unitarian ministers were major players in formalizing a brand of humanism they called religious humanism. Yes, Virginia, it does exist, as Bob said, here in the United States. One of those ministers was Curtis Reese. Reese grew up an evangelical Christian. His father was a Southern Baptist deacon, and several of his relatives were ministers. Curtis himself felt the call to preach in his teenage years. And so eventually he graduated from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville in 1910 and became the state evangelist for the 500 Southern Baptist churches of the Illinois State Baptist Association. But he didn't make a very good Southern Baptist. He wrote in his unpublished autobiography, during the years as state evangelist, during the years as state evangelist, my heresies, which had begun even during my seminary days, it's the case for many of us, due to the impact of higher criticism, my heresies began to grow apace, he said. Eventually, to gain the freedom to preach his deepest held values and beliefs, he joined the Unitarians. Reverend Reese rose through the ranks of the American Unitarian Association. He served congregations in Illinois and Iowa, became secretary of the Western Unitarian Conference. He was for a while president of the Universalist-founded Lombard College in Illinois. He edited publications. He worked for racial equality. He received rewards upon rewards for his work. Rees and others sensed a shift in religion in their time. In his work, The Meaning of Humanism, written in 1931, he said, "The trend in modern religious developments is away from the transcendent, the authoritative, the dogmatic, and toward the human, the experiential, the tentative. Away from the abnormal, the formal, the ritualistic, and toward the normal, the informal, the usual. Away from the extraordinary mystic expression, the exalted mood, the otherworldly, and toward the ethical, the social, and the worldly. Away from religion conceived as one of man's concerns, and toward religion conceived as man's one concern." We hear echoes of that in the song that Katie sang, "Holy as the Day is Spent." In 1933, Rees and several other Unitarian ministers authored and signed the Humanist Manifesto. Scientists, philosophers, journalists, others signed it too. Rees contributed to its composition. The manifesto stressed that theism is, quote, past. We're done with that. That the universe is self-existing and not created. That the, quote, traditional dualism of mind and body must be rejected, and that religion, quote, must formulate its hopes and plans in the light of the scientific spirit and method. Humanism was not calling for the destruction of religion, but for a reform of religion that would place the concerns of humanity rather than the pleasing of God at its center. In founding religious humanism, Rees and the others were reacting to the conservative religion all around them. The religion, in fact, that most of them had experienced in their youths. That is evident in Rees's 1926 pamphlet entitled Humanism. That's now required reading for incoming Unitarian Universalist ministers. In a section of the pamphlet where he's reflecting on the importance of evidence, Rees wrote, "Religious beliefs, for the most part, have been founded not on carefully weighed evidence, but on uncriticized desire, ecstatic experience, and false logic. Authoritarian creeds usually consist primarily of pronouncements in regard to things unknown, if not unknowable, and secondarily with man's conduct in view of the primary pronouncements. But thus far, there's not a shred of competent evidence in regard to the nature and purpose of ultimate reality. Hence, a conduct creed based on such pronouncements is a house of straw built on shifting sand. Only man's sound instincts have saved him from the utter scandal of committing his body as well as his soul to such precarious dwellings. A healthy nature has saved many a man from the logical consequences of his formal professions." That's a great line. The genuine humanist is willing to follow the evidence wherever its reasonable interpretation may lead. As to what makes a religion valid, Rees wrote, "A worthwhile religion must have human life as its aim, and the fulfillment of human life as its supreme test of human values. All other considerations, whether of an otherworldly or a materialistic character, are of secondary importance. At the fiery altar of human life must be tested every idea, every symbol, and every institution. We have built and are continuing always to build a faith which has human good at its heart. Even those of us who sometimes use God language in this tradition acknowledge that the notion of God is only useful as God serves humanity, not the other way around. Both the Unitarians and the Universalists had the seed of that thought in their theologies. Universalists, who insisted that God was love and would not punish human beings eternally, were inspired by the dissonance between the harsh, punishing God they heard preached about and the compassion they felt for their fellow human beings. How could their love for their neighbors be greater than God's? There must be a great, unfailing, unstoppable love, they said, at work in the world which refuses to give up on us. and the Unitarians, when they insisted that Jesus was not uniquely the Son of God, but a child of God just like the rest of us, were in some ways saying Jesus didn't do anything that you and I can't do. That if anything in this bizarre, beautiful universe is divine, it's found in human beings. Those seeds of human-centered faith, maybe, came to fruition in religious humanism, a notion that is at the heart of Unitarian Universalism. Whether you believe in God is not the central question of this faith. The central question is Reese's question, the humanist question. What good is your faith? To you? To the world? What does your faith do to improve the human condition? At the fiery altar of human life must be tested every idea, every symbol, and every institution. What good must a valid religion do? Well, Reese and some of his colleagues went on to lay out a plan for the improvement of the social order. We need people, they said, who know what they're doing to work toward the common good, so we need to raise educational requirements and make education free and universal. Would that he could come to Arizona today. Where are you, Curtis Reese? They said we need to be organized to make decisions not just as individual countries, but as an interdependent world of people. And they said when people fall through the cracks, and we know that people will fall through the cracks, we need a meaningful social guarantee, structures to supply aid to people who need it. Notice that what Reese and the humanists are calling for is not just donating money or offering charity. As important as those things are, the religious humanists and humanism still today in our faith call us to address the deeper issues that require us to donate money and offer charity in the first place. Humanism refuses to relegate improvements to the great hereafter. It declares that compassion lies not in the heart of a transcendent God, but in the heart of every human being. If the world is going to get better, it's us who will make it so. We gather in worship then to nurture hearts of compassion, to transform ourselves that we might transform the world. I am a humanist. As a resident hospital chaplain, I offered the staff a presentation on being a humanist chaplain. I'm committed to the principles of humanism, including reliance on evidence and the value of human reason. But as a humanist myself, a humanist Christian, but a humanist nonetheless, I do have a loving criticism of humanism within Unitarian Universalism. As always, you should feel free to disagree with me. By now, I hope that goes without saying. I think humanism can too easily become a no-God fundamentalism. Only people who never use the word God are welcome in the humanist club, some people seem to assert. And every use of the word God is chalked up as an offense to humanist sensibilities. That kind of humanism is doomed to fail in this pluralistic faith, or at least be a constant spiritual irritation. But if a person can affirm every other point of the Humanist Manifesto, the importance of evidence, the inborn ability to be compassionate, the prominence of the human concern rather than supernatural concerns, but uses God language from time to time, somebody like me, for example, is that person then allowed to call themselves a humanist in public? If not, it sounds like creedalism to me. Maybe it's time for a new humanist manifesto, one that continues to proclaim the centrality of evidence and reason, but acknowledges the God of Paul Tillich, the ground of being, the God of process theology, who is always unfolding and of whose unfolding we all are a part. The God who is what is. As the great humanist Curtis Reese wrote, with many serious thinkers, the thought of God is undergoing far-reaching changes. While this God may be an acknowledgement that there's mystery in the universe, it is no threat to reason. And it would be wise to acknowledge the usefulness of God language for some humanists, rather than continuing to react against the God of hellfire and brimstone revivals of the early 20th century, as if that conception of God is the only conception. We Unitarian Universalists are all humanists to one degree or another. Maybe we should stop demanding that anyone who bears the name humanist must be a full-fledged atheist. I say some are and some are not, and that's okay. Why do I say we need this change? Because today's Unitarian Universalism needs to be a tapestry. In view of the world, a tapestry that includes pieces from theists and atheists alike. We need to both acknowledge the power of human reason, never leave it, and acknowledge that there is mystery beyond human comprehension. That means God will sometimes be mentioned, and that's okay. And most of the time, God will not be mentioned, and that's okay. I say let's emphasize instead the beating heart of humanism, compassion, the love of all humanity, the potential of human beings working together for the good, and a dogged commitment to make those notions real in our time. The God or no God debate is a distraction. Humanism is a lot more than that. The Dalai Lama echoed the themes of humanism when he said, whether you believe in God or not does not matter so much. Whether you believe in Buddha or not does not matter so much. As a Buddhist, whether you believe in reincarnation or not does not matter so much. You must lead a good life. And a good life does not just mean good food, good clothes, good shelter. These are not sufficient. A good motivation is what is needed. Compassion, without dogmatism, without complicated philosophy. Just understanding that others are human brothers and sisters and respecting their rights and human dignity, end quote. From its very beginning, humanism has called us to compassion. At its core, Unitarian Universalism will always, always be a humanist, human-centered, compassion-preaching faith. Humanism, with its emphasis on evidence and human reason and making real change in the world, affirms the quote from Burnette Brown, compassion is not a virtue, it's a commitment. It's not something we have or don't have, it's something we choose to practice. So let's practice it. Maybe we leave some of the debates behind. Called to work by humanist values and by life itself, let us commit ourselves to compassion. Amen.